I'm Allison LaForgia, managing editor of HousingWire's content studio, and today I have a special episode of 10-Minute Talks where I'm sitting down with the recent winners of Ivory Innovations 2025 Hack a House competition, the One Block Away team from Harvard University. And I want to start by saying congratulations to y'all. This is such an interesting competition. It's so exciting to see students get interested in housing and look at affordability, and I'm excited to talk to each of y'all about how you got into the competition and your idea. So let's start with some introductions.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having us. My name is Justin. I'm at the Harvard University's Master in Real Estate program currently. I've been working as an architect for the past 3 years in Boston and have a strong interest in real estate development.
Hey everyone, my name's Tejas. I'm also a master's in real estate student at the GSD currently. Before this, I was doing 3 years as a consultant at McKinsey, mostly working in the Middle East on urban design and national housing projects. And my background educationally before that, I have a master's in the humanities, but my focus was on urban studies.
And hi, I'm Noah Garcia, also in the MRE program with Tejas and Justin and Marco. I have a background in undergrad in architecture, worked as an architect for a number of years, and then pursued data science and tech innovation.
I'm Pranav. I'm studying the Master's of Design at Harvard. I have a background in architecture for the past 3 years in the San Francisco Bay Area, both in the for-profit and nonprofit space. And I'm really interested in kind of the intersection of design and development innovation.
Marco Velasquez, background in real estate private equity, going back to investment banking all the way up to now have a big interest in development and affordability.
All right. So you are a very talented group of people, and it sounds like you all come from very different backgrounds. So how did you guys come together as a group?
I think, first of all, a few of us were, I think, interested in the prompt and the hackathon itself because of the affordable housing component and obviously our various interests in real estate development. So we sort of came together with interests in a few different realms of like skill sets and specifically like design, finance, construction, data science. So coming together, I think, was pretty natural for us. A lot of us obviously are in the same program here at Harvard, and Pranav is also in a lot of our real estate and other classes. So I think it was natural that when we came together, it made sense that all of us coming from these different backgrounds could work together to come up with sort of new innovative solutions for affordability.
Yeah, and I would add that Harvard does a really good job of our class set revolving around sustainability and affordability. Like how can we solve a problem today? And that's really at the forefront of like how our classes are formed. And so we are of the same mindset, technically, as we're going through this process. And so, finding sort of that interdisciplinary approach where, each one of us has a very distinct background, but, coming together can be very powerful. It was very natural for us to converge and start coming up with ideas really quick. And we almost surprised ourselves in a way, right? As we came together and we started talking, it was like one of those moments where it's like, wow, like as a group coming from different backgrounds, different nationalities, right? Different areas of the world coming together on a single topic was kind of amazing, honestly. And I think each one of us, even to the point that we got to today, is very proud and happy about that moment.
Totally agree. And I also think that something about like personality types has something to do with it, because I do think that the nature of our programs is very like, if you want to stay on kind of the investment side of things, like the entire time throughout your career, like you can totally do that. But I think we're all kind of interested in seeking out kind of like multidisciplinary, holistic solutions, and that was kind of what that shared interest kind of helped our pitch.
Yeah, a couple more things I'd like to call out. I think number one, the Joint Center for Housing Studies here. I think we got to know about the Hacker House from them, from David Luberoff, and they were pretty generous, and they offered us space for the initial few hours when we started kind of hashing out our idea. And yeah, like Marco said, I think it's been unexpectedly kind of easy to kind of come up with this idea and kind of work together, because I think we were good with our idea in like an hour, and we were mostly done with it by midnight, kind of putting it together, which was yeah. And then
Yeah.
I don't want to let our secrets out, but yeah, I don't think it was like we didn't have to stay up overnight. We didn't have to kill ourselves. I think it was really lovely. But then we were also happy with the result that we had in terms of its sophistication, given the time constraints, and also just the fact that it was a solid idea. I feel like Marco and I, we had a second where I asked Marco, "Are you sure this works? This looks too good to be true." And the others, you can tell, you can say if this has to be cut out. But
Yeah.
I feel like that was quite interesting to me. We ended up on a solution which, for me at least, was too good to believe in a way. But then over the next few hours, I was like, "Oh, this actually makes sense. That's great." So
Yeah, which kind of goes to the point, Allison, where it's the ideas are there and they're really great. So how do you get policy to agree to the ideas, right? The fact that, Tejas is saying it didn't take us, too long to conceptualize what we wanted to do and bring it all together, right? I mean, obviously talented group of people, but it's not rocket science, right? Real estate is not rocket science. It's how do they let us do this? That's the thing, right? And so that's what we got to figure out. And Texas, as a case study, allowed us to think about it a little bit further. And so that's why we chose that market, because they do have some density, policies that they've been passing to at least contemplate what could happen in the new typology that we were thinking of. So yeah.
Let's take 2 steps back here. So the One Block Away team won the construction and design prompt of the Ivory Innovations 2025 Hacker House competition. Let's talk to the audience about what your actual solution is, just so that we can understand it. I mean, now that we've gone through the how it came together, the how the team came together, and what the different perspectives bring. Let's talk a little bit about that and dig a little bit more into the Texas case study and a couple other things about how do we actually do this? How do we let the regulation let us do this? Let's talk about the idea more.
So I'll frame it first, then you guys can talk about the solution. So the idea really came from the understanding that there's a ubiquity in the current housing stock that's available, in that there's a single family home. It's occupied by what you think is a nuclear family, but we recognize that the nuclear family structure is no longer the most prevalent housing arrangement that you find throughout America. And so we looked at the data. That was a big part of it as well. And we saw that many people are living in multi-generational households, or solo households, or just some other scenario aside from the nuclear family. So through that, we looked at a solution that would satisfy different living arrangements to fill a gap in the market. One, and then we also looked at prototypes attached to the design guys for how to reduce construction costs and increase construction time.
Yeah. And so our design takes essentially the envelope and footprint and even construction material character of a typical Texas 2-story single family home, and instead squeezes 4 different smaller, 1 bedroom, 1 living room unit that's designed a little bit more for those kind of underserved types like Noah was talking about. Maybe you're like empty nesters, like maybe you're like single residents, couples, no kids, like those types of households, and kind of brings it together over our maybe like our secret sauce that's our prefabricated core that's developed to reduce construction costs. And maybe Justin can talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, definitely. I think for us, we wanted to come up with a solution that was really feasible and scalable. So we came up with this, like Pranav said, a prefabricated core that basically houses a lot of the more essential and more expensive components of construction in single family homes, like circulation, the stairs, plumbing, the bathrooms, washer and dryer. So some of the essentials that are often more expensive to route within a home itself. We sort of consolidated that all within a core. And I think a major driver for that core size was the ability for it to be transported on just a very typical flatbed truck. So we had sort of a set of dimensions that we had to adhere to make work. And with that sort of element, we wanted to bridge both offsite and onsite construction. So this core would be prefab in a factory. It could go through the sort of approvals process, pass all the inspections, and be brought on site. And from there, we could still involve, the unions and the laborers to actually build out the rest of the house. And I think that was something that was very important to us. A lot of innovation tries to really just disrupt the market fully. And we wanted to do something that was a little bit maybe more palatable to the communities and the laborers and the workers of those regions, and try to combine something with affordability, but not fully flip the script that it could really not be approved or enacted on a sort of larger scale.
I want to take a second to pause there because I think that's a really interesting consideration that gets lost in these conversations often, and that I truly think it's really special and important when you look at different geographical areas, especially when we talk about that regulation piece that Go mentioned on a different state by state or even occasionally county by county area, is the idea that you can still have this idea and have the local community still have not only access to affordable housing, but also the economic uplift of building it is truly something that I think is a standout benefit to this solution.
Yeah, 100%. I think that was at the forefront of our thinking, right? We have a class, a few of us are in this class, where we talk about stakeholders in different areas of development, right? Tejas is nodding his head because he knows exactly what I'm talking about. But, leaving out the labor union, being completely disruptive, is not really conducive to making progress, right? And so, we chose Texas, obviously as a case study. But if you look at areas like Chicago or even Cambridge, where we're at today, you're going to have to involve all these stakeholders, and you're going to have to involve the public as well, right? Because if you're doing a project at scale, it's going to gain some media attention, and you're going to want to balance that media attention, to your advantage. And so how do you do that? A lot of people, we felt, would probably bring up concepts or thoughts that were just way too innovative, way too far out in the future, that may happen 20 years from now. But something that can actually get done today would need to have a very, very careful balance, because we've sat in on meetings. We've sat in on public meetings as part of our course requirements. We've sat on and we've listened to the public of Cambridge talking to us about what they hate about new developments, right? So we've heard the union speak about issues that they've had with new developments and affordable housing and all these things. So we took all of that into consideration and said, well, let's just take this back to small town in Texas, but still you have all these stakeholders that are surrounding, that you have to make sure are little by little, getting on board with what you're trying to do. So if you don't completely cut them out, you're in a good space, right? So if we create a core that can be prefab that actually helps our costs, but then have the wings sort of be built out on site. We can still bring on union labor. We can still have the trades, on the ground on site that can contribute to that, density building. I think it's a good thing, right? So not only do you have to think about the financial aspect of it, right? When you're modeling, it's not just purely IRR. There's also a public IRR that you have to think about when you're thinking through this, and that's where the design and the other ideation between this group of people becomes really important. It's not just a spreadsheet; it's also human.
You managed to get community buy-in in the process.
Yes, ma'am.
Which is no small feat.
Not just community buy-in, but I think city buy-in as well. To Marco's point, another stakeholder that we have to deal with is the actual city officials themselves. And Dallas City had recently passed legislation that residential construction up to 8 units can follow the Dallas residential building code as opposed to the international building code, which makes it much easier to build kind of like duplexes and fourplexes and those kinds of projects, which is exactly what we fit into. Kind of going to show that the attitude of Dallas as a whole towards densification is kind of like, we want to get there, we need to get there, but small steps at a time. And that's kind of where our solution fits in.
Small palatable steps at a time, right? Where you get, as Marco and you just touched on, the buy-in from stakeholders across the solution. But I think the regulatory piece is always one piece of it, but the actual community buy-in and the people where you're hoping where love the solution or embrace the solution wholly for the people who end up in the units, it's also really important, right?
There's one more factor, which is about just the flexibility that this offer also offers you. Like we have the core, but then we can also what is built around the core is not defined, like not strictly defined. We have like 4 or 5 options for like what the orientation of those houses might look like, how they kind of orient to each other, to the plot of land which they're situated on. So the idea is that you can you don't have to repeat this exact same unit if you're building in like one community, but you can have variations, and you can also have variations which fit into the existing kind of parcelization of that particular community. And yeah, all of this to say, I think just to Marco's point, right? I think you don't want to be an innovator just on technology and like innovate to an extent that like then to actually get your product built, you'll have to go like get like 50,000 clearances, and then you're just doing something entirely new. But you want to do something which can get done now, because like the crisis, I think, is ultimately how fast can you build and how much can you build, right?
So when you guys intentionally went through the solution, you mentioned that you guys came up with it pretty quickly, that you used Texas as the case study, but was the intention when you went through the actual execution of the idea that this would be something that you could see account for different geographies, budgets, regulatory environments to make this feasible at scale nationally? Was that the thought process that you guys went through, so that it wasn't just applicable in this one context, it was a national potential solution?
Yeah, definitely. I think that was one of the biggest drivers for us. So one thing I would say that I think Marco, Pranav, and Tejas have already touched on is basically working with policy and progressive policy rather than working against it. So I think for us, like this idea of increased by right zoning across the country is clearly like a policy that is taking hold in various regions. So we wanted to work with that and come up with an idea that really basically builds on existing policy and new progressive policy that is currently happening today. So for us, I think that sort of prefabricated core was a great solution to bringing costs down while introducing a new typology. And I think more importantly than that, for us, it's not really about providing one design that fits, for example, in Texas, but rather providing a product. So our product is really that core. And Tejas sort of talked about how you could build around it in different ways. And that will allow builders across the country to sort of build the house in a way that fits into the fabric of their neighborhood, fits into the scale of a single family residential neighborhood. So we really want this to be a product that could support this new typology, and that obviously can translate into different neighborhoods across the country, different aesthetics that these neighborhoods have. So we're not trying to prescribe an exact design, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's huge, Allison, because again, if you think about like what's out there today, and like if you can pre-order something, like if you can pre-order a fabricated, 2 bedroom or something like that, it's going to come with a very specific design. And you're going to get, it may not fit into your neighborhood. What Justin is saying is that we're creating the core as a product, but the wings are then designed around the aesthetic of the neighborhood. So when you're walking down, you have your kid on a stroller or you're walking your dog, you're not like, oh, that's an affordable housing building. Like, that's ugly. Like, no, it's just another home, right? You're just walking past it as if it's normal. And that was very important to us because what we've seen in the market, people that are trying to be extremely disruptive and creating products out of a factory, you get what you see. You don't have the ability to really customize. And so we wanted to leave a little hanger ability there to use aesthetics that are consistent with the environment. And that was important for us as well.
The social impact of that is just absolutely massive. And I think not just from an approval standpoint, from a community standpoint, but for the people who are going to live in the units. And I think that seeing that end user placement so often gets lost in these conversations. And that's why I was so excited ages ago when I first talked to Diana and the Ivory Innovations team about House, is that it takes brain trusts like y'all to come up with these ideas and just sit down and say, okay, we're going to not just look at the financial piece of this. We're going to look at the design piece of this. We're going to look at implementation, not just in one area where we think this is going to work, but we see that this policy is changing across different states, and we're going to continue to see this be something that's changed in different environments. So this makes this applicable in multiple locations at scale, which I think is so interesting. But the social perspective of the actual solutions and the people who are living in these units sometimes isn't a piece of the conversation. And I have to say, I just think it's so impressive that you guys have so thoroughly considered that and how all of this actually impacts the people who will live in them. And I'm just honestly so impressed. So I have to ask, what's next? What's next? I know you guys have to go to the next phase of the competition for the overall winner, but what's next for that? What's next for y'all?
To first put a bow on what Allison said, though, I think the diversity and comprehensiveness of the solution came from the diversity of the team, and so the fact that we all had these different expertise, we were able to tackle the problem from every angle. Find the weak spots. Tejas was great at poking holes, questioning things, and so the what next. That's us again poking holes, saying, okay, where can this be improved? Pranav is spearheading a survey to understand people's needs and desires relating to what we're doing, to see okay, is this something people are actually looking for? Is there a market demand on the ground level that we can respond to? So that's something that we'll look at. But yeah, in 2 weeks or so, we're doing our presentations in Utah against the other two teams, which have different prompts. So that'll be interesting to see how that all pans out. But I think in the end, we're looking forward to developing this a little further. This is less than 24 hours of thought, and so we can kind of take a bigger view of it to see where it can be improved.
So Allison, we're getting actually a landing page together that Pranav is kind of spearheading. So maybe we can post that with you guys, but we'd like to get an understanding of what people feel about this more social type of living, right? I don't know, Noah, if you want to talk a little bit about like multi-generational, co-living, like what we thought about, older wisdom reaching younger kids, young professionals meeting together in our sort of central space, and how we sort of thought about that as a movement moving forward. But long story short, Allison, is we want to conduct some surveys, and we do want to beta test this like in real life in Texas. So we're actively looking at different sites to try and do number one, and hopefully that will be very soon. And Texas allows for it. The laws are in place policy-wise. So, I would say in the next, 12 months, we may have, number one of NeighborCore up and running. So.
I'll also say, I think, today, right now, I think we're kind of at the point of being our own biggest critics. We put something together in 24 hours and we're all happy with how it went down. And of course, we can like look at each other all day and be like, we're so smart. We came up with a great idea. But at the end of the day, I think getting feedback from pretty much anybody who can be like, I think it can be improved in X, Y, and Z way. I think that's really important to us. And that's part of why we want to gauge like public interest for who would actually live here. But I also think kind of bouncing ideas off of our peers, our faculty, like industry professionals, like that's really important to us as well, because at the end of the day, it's coming from an egoless perspective of like, how can we increase the housing supply? How can we solve this housing affordability problem happening not only in Texas, but all around the country?
All right. Well, I think we're going to wrap phase one there. And it sounds like I'm going to have more conversations with you guys as we get through, not just where we land for the actual conversation that you guys have coming up in 2 weeks in Utah, but there's more to come from this team. So Justin, Pranav, Noah, Daz, Marco, thank you so much for talking to me. And for the HousingWire audience, we're going to put all of the links that Marco and Pranav just mentioned down below in this episode link. And we're going to continue to update the story as we get more information. So make sure you turn in to future episodes. Thank y'all for joining me today.